What would happen if Anakin Skywalker reached his true potential? This is an idea, a story, and a question that has been asked 1,000 times, and only now have I finally become comfortable enough with my own voice to announce my answer to the algorithm. What would happen? What if he truly followed the Force, and what now? To start, we must begin with Smee, before Anakin was even born, back when she was still young and sold to Gardula the Hutt. But in our story, she sold instead to Jabba the Hutt, criminal ruler of Tatooine and arguably the strongest bastion of power on the planet. From there, our story would proceed exactly as how George Lucas wrote it, until 34 BBY, 2 years before the beginning of Phantom Menace. No longer in service to one of the Hutt underlings, Anakin didn't grow up wasting time among the scrapyards and junk piles, but instead splicing data pads, hacking into credit catches, and forging receipts from as young as 5 years old. A hobby his mother greatly detested, but something she also had no say over, since she herself was always kept busy, either preparing exotic foods and meals for Jabba, or swiping and cleaning the endless halls of his compound. In fact, even if she did voice her opinion, Anakin's value was the only thing keeping any of them around. Having Gamorrean guards sue away daily visits and requests to sell the boy, while interior accountants struggled to count and organize the daily flow of credits that Smee's son brought in. A luxury the Lord of Tatooine grew more and more dependent upon. More and more, the boy became crucial to operations, both public and private. Young enough for Jabba to mold, yet gifted enough to act even at such a young age. Going so far as to give Anakin free reign around his compound, able to go anywhere, except outside, of course. Codes to locked prison cells given without a thought, transmissions private to others left public to him, and rooms others knew nothing about he'd eaten lunch in several times over. This was the life that Anakin lived. It was all he had known. Dusted deserts of sand dunes and twin suns only seen during the rarest operations that let him roam around under escort, and the chilled moon-swept nights that accompanied them, of course, always available through the gaping windows that he gazed out from during the latest hours before sleep. Anakin was happy here. He was comfortable here, and his mother was happy for him. Until one day, Jabba would summon Anakin before him with a sour and scorned expression the boy had never seen before. Familiar and fluent in Huttese, as suddenly and soundly as he was basic, no translation was needed to understand the source of his rage. A deal broken and a financial bargain made invalid. Having coordinated with several treasure hunters, splicers, and Mandalorians seeking money instead of honor, a recent wrong was made right, but only because Anakin broke Jabba's one rule. He left the confines of the compound, storing himself aboard the very ship that Jabba sent to recover his losses. And he was also the only reason their mission succeeded to begin with. Uchakaba Waba! Jabba's flabbering mouth slapped side to side, acknowledging Anakin's importance while chastising him for forgetting his place. A sleight of hand that the crime lord had allowed to pass far too often for his own pleasure, and something he had now aimed to change, whether the boy in front of him would like the news he'd hear or not. All at first appeared fine to Anakin, as he sought to play off such hostility, especially those from Bib Fortuna, an angry and envious Twi'lek, always jealous of the importance that Anakin held in his lord's eye. and the happiest of all in the room to now give the same boy his well-deserved punishment. The news that his mother had been sold to another, bounding from Fortuna's curled mouth. Speaking over this handler, Jabba spoke directly to Anakin, chastising him further and reminding him again to remember his place beneath the crime lord of Tatooine. But the very language that Anakin understood mere moments ago came across now as nothing but garbed speech, too faded to discern, while his mind itself felt the room go dark, almost as dark as the thoughts that accompanied them. What was the only word the boy could muster? For all his worth, all his knowledge, all his use, he was still nothing but a tool to be owned and discarded by the hut in front of him, the same way his mother was now discarded, intentionally torn and left alive, but sent far, far away, to be never seen again. A fitting reward for the brazen boy that thought he could break Jabba's rule. You will never see her again. You will never hear her voice again, or feel her touch. So now you will do what you are told. Bib Fortuna couldn't hold back the smile on his face, igniting a pit inside the stomach of the boy that bore their brunt, gritting teeth and squinting eyes as gestures were sneered, accompanied by hands once loose becoming tightened into fists, constrained and trembling, shaking and growling. Normally a favorite for sure, such disrespect wouldn't be allowed even by the same Gamorrean guards he grew up alongside, causing two to cross the path between Jabba and Anakin, both raising their actions while snorting disapprovingly. Anakin wanted nothing more for them to move. He wanted the crime lord behind them to beg, to plead, to return his mother and to answer to him, not the other way around. But he was just a boy, trained well in a blaster and splicing, yes. But was he capable of taking on even one single Gamorrean? No, absolutely not. And this realization only fed more anger and hate into him, digging nails so deep that skin torn while his jawline turned solid, glaring without pause at the same hut that now condemned him, a glare that Jabba failed to notice or care about. Too busy reaching out to grab a handful of patty frogs, the crime lord became disturbed only after tossing the snack inside and choking on it whole, finding it harder and harder to breathe by the moment, but still too busy to notice the tightening hand that Anakin held to accompany it. The same boy that then turned to run away, spewing hatred and disdain in his mind, but too weak himself to act. The last thing Anakin heard was the chorus of laughter from the accompanying crew, guards, and guests hosted in attendance, followed last by the choked recovery of the same crime lord that owned most of them. No more and never again, as Anakin was haunted by this laughter close to his heart, running first to the shared room with his mother, before finding the now emptied room unbearable, forcing him to flee again, running the same halls he had grown so accustomed to calling home, and now the place he hated more than anything. Anywhere else but here. Anything else but here. Anyone who could point him towards his mother. And then a thought came to him, leading to the shield hangar entrance that he had previously arrived at barely an hour ago. The location of a freshly stolen spaceship that only he alone was able to splice into before. Something he would now replicate, entering the very codes Jabba had entrusted in him so many years ago. The hangar doors meant to keep others out, parted in an instant. But such an opening didn't come without a cost. For a dozen shepherd alarms, all triggered at once, blaring sirens, flashing red, and alerting everyone inside that something was horribly wrong. So wrong that Anakin himself prepared to be caught. Hearing hurried footsteps rush down behind him, he knew there was nothing to be done. Too young to fight, and also too small to outrun. Only after the group of 3 Gamorrean guardsmen ran past the hallway he stood in did he even react, shuffling forward so fast that he slipped and fell, and slumping over to the side to hit the emergency door shutoff and splicing the panel to fry its wiring, closing it shut permanently. At least, that's what he thought, as time took even longer to gather his bearings and turn to the side to observe the ship once more from Maikito.
Additional security forces are needed in the cargo area.
Throughout all of it, alarms led him to move quicker and quicker, decoupling locks, unraveling port codes, and pulling fuel cords loose, moving with the same rehearsed muscle memory that he'd learned since his youngest memories, all until the security system went dark, sounds went silent, and lights went out, brought back only after the momentary ignition of Jabba's backup generator. Only then was Anakin finally able to clearly think, as the brief lapse in power led to the total collapse of all auditory sirens. Steel and steady red lights were all that remained, replacing the once illuminate interiors that preceded them. No longer were they even permitted to flash, an automatic precaution of the generator, seeking to preserve power. The sealed hangar door behind Anakin was then pierced by the thrust of a crimson lightsaber, and metal too was smashed, battered and beaten by an aura that sought to unravel the very foundation around them, spreading fear not just across the boy that witnessed it, but the entire room itself, polluted and diluted by sensations of dread that made Anakin's spine tingle. He knew he couldn't waste any more time while sprinting up the ship's ramp before dashing through its hollowed corridors to reach the pilot's cabin, flipping switches and dials with hurried breath. In another place or time, he would slowly power up the vessel, setting engine levels to even and allowing turbines to flare and deflate before naturally lifting off. But this wasn't such a time or a place, as the door behind him fully gave way when the saber that drilled it was pulled loose in an arched curve with a shadowy foot kicking it loose and the force sending it flying forward, smashing straight through one of the 4 engines that Anakin needed to jump into hyperspace. His only option now was to punch all 3 remaining engines to full while still docked in Jabba's palace. And so, stone became broken, computers were scorched, and the cloaked figure was blasted back before Anakin could even reach his chair, surging across the doomed landscape while barely adrift from hitting it, narrowly kept the flight as even more warning alarms were rung. But his seat was then found, and the steering wheel corrected, pulling himself up and up, going ever further. And as he went higher and higher, the inflamed engine became snuffed in the midst of Tatooine's orbit, and turbulence finally settled. But not the fear. That was too strong, too imminent, and too close to be ignored, especially when he finally took notice of the darkened designs, decorations, and canisters sprawled along the wall, each corner accompanied by the veiled sculpture of some stone woman that had long since passed. And although this wasn't his first time in the vessel, it was his first moment alone, too busy splicing during his prior incursion to become nosy. Only now was that luxury provided for him. Flipping the autopilot on, but not knowing a destination to give it, he decided it would be best to simply drift through open space, an area as empty and lifeless as he was now, especially without his mother. And so he rushed to access the nearest communication module, its coded latch, seeking to keep records hidden but too quick to fold as names were given, deals, credits, hideouts, and row upon row of messages, all addressed to some strange named Moon Hugo Damask, most of which were already known by the snooping boy that browsed them. Most, but not all. And that's why the slated placement of Nar Shaddaa piqued his interest. Seemingly the perfect place to find his mother, and a place who Hugo the Masked had recently received news of fresh deliveries to, some foreign, an underground market called Shadowtown. During all of this, the events of the Naboo blockade, the landing of Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan, as well as the betrayal of the Federation, would proceed just like in George Lucas's story, landing near the Gungan Swamp, hiding from invading droids, and garnishing a well-earned escort through the planet's center. Nothing would change for quite some time. At least, not until their escape from Naboo, that is, where, in George Lucas's timeline, their hyperdrive was damaged, and the journey to the core would take too long without it, forcing them to land on Tatooine. But now, in our timeline, their ship escapes unscathed and unharmed before jumping into hyperspace and reaching Coruscant without any trouble, delivering Queen Amidala safely, but sour. Sour because, just like in George's story, no one in the Senate would believe her, at least not enough to sway the powers of democracy that held them, because they didn't trust her. None of them did. Those were the words that felt laced as they left the lips of her most trusted colleague and friend, Senator Palpatine. And it was something she couldn't argue with, because she too believed them. More and more, she felt like she was being excluded from the Senate, isolated from their meetings, becoming a member in mere name and nothing else, knowing not one singular person to blame until the culprit was labeled and verbally tossed in front of her. Supreme Chancellor Valorum was a puppet of the Federation, paid for and bought off, rented and owned, and bribed near weekly. There was nothing she could do to stop him, nothing to challenge him, nothing except a vote of no confidence, that is. And of course, meanwhile, Anakin continued to be lost, searching for first days, then weeks, and maybe even months. But it became harder and harder to tell with the few hours of sleep he managed to get. A 9-year-old boy seeking to buy access into the underground black market of Hutter's Crown Moon. Absolutely no way he'd have a chance. A tough pill to realize, as no one wanted anything to do with him. So what could he do now? Go back to Jabba's? Apparently not. Not when that compound itself had been leveled and the criminal crime lord done away with for good. Not now that the very Lord of Tatooine himself had been usurped and replaced by no less than a dozen pretenders. And so, Anakin wallowed and sat, cradling knees against his chest while squatting in the emptied ship he'd stolen from Hugo the Masked. And in that emptied hall, he embraced the only thing that still followed him from home. His fear. Fear from being alone, yes, but most importantly, the fear of the unknown. Fear for his mother, for her safety, for her survival. He was afraid that every second he wasted, his mother suffered, forging the same fist he made in front of Jabba before slamming its backhanded girth against the wall behind him. Only then did he realize this wasn't just some average metallic surface, but instead, he'd accidentally struck some strange button that enabled the very wall to cave in, moving further and further until a jarred doorway was left bare and chilled gust poured free like fog, colder than the emptied stars outside, yet kept vibrant by a myriad of red, orange, and violet. Enough for Anakin to finally stand. Glimpsing their sources, that were sometimes shared but normally unique, shelved holocrons were paired alongside edged lightsabers, some with plaques, while others stood alone and bare. Many were scarred and battered, while a few were prestigious and new. But only one thing caught Anakin's eye: a mask of white and red, avoided eyes and a missing mouth, and placed like a jewel in the midst of a pedestal. Walking near, he took sight of a world long since gone, a battle too far away, and a Sith Lord whose name too many had forgotten. Blaster fire, channeled charges, Mandalorian jetpacks and proton bombs bursting while lightsabers clashed over the strained planet of Helios 4. Take up the mask. The urge hit stronger as hands reached without thinking or halting, not even when skin froze on touch. Power. Power was the offer. Power was the bargain, and power was the deal. To place the mask upon his face, and he would gain the power he desired. And while many would be consumed by thoughts of this power far too quickly, Anakin was still just a boy, and he thought of only one thing: fear. Fear for his mother.